12th, 2020. What makes a good short-term rental? This is the 39.6 Facebook Live and YouTube Live Finance Show, the show that teaches high earners like yourselves how to make your money work for you so you don't have to work for your money. We talk general investing, taxes, real estate, syndications, Airbnb, paying for childcare, college, and even the car you drive. Today's question comes from a huge flurry of questions about short-term rentals since PIMDCon 2020. I have not opened all of my private messages. I can't get through them all. But at the top of the list, I had a message from Joey here. He says, my wife and I are closing on a duplex in San Francisco. And got a couple people in here. If you can hear me, you can see me, please let me know. Please just make a little comment in the chat box. That'd be awesome. So he says, we are buying a duplex in San Francisco below asking price, which is awesome. It is being sold under one single deed and one single loan, but has two addresses. So this is a true duplex with a single deed, as opposed to the property that we have, which is a single family attached property where there's two separate properties with two separate deeds sold independent of each other. Your PMDCon talk got us very excited because we are living in one unit and renting the other, and we are considering Airbnb versus doing a long-term rental in the other side. Thank you, Facebook user, for letting me know that audio and video are working. We would love to capture the losses under Schedule C without reps. We have our original home converted to a cash flowing rental. That is awesome, but they have not been able to capture the losses yet because those are on Schedule E and their income is presumptively above $150,000. So the passive activity loss limitations exclude those losses from transferring to their 1040. Do you find that most CPAs are willing or reluctant to do this house hacking approach with Schedule C? So I would recommend you look at episode number 64, first of all, regarding Schedule C versus Schedule E. We've been doing this for 4 years on Schedule C every single year. The first year, kind of had to convince my CPA. She went for it. I showed her the information on it. A lot of people don't do short-term rentals, right? So it's a relatively small percentage of the population who do them. And then it's a very small percentage of people who do them who also have a ton of W-2 income. I mean, there's people who do short-term rentals like professionally. This is what they do. And they're doing like 10 short-term rentals, and that is their job. And then there's a lot of people who are very amateurish about it, and they have like one thing, and they're testing it out, and their income may be normal. But there's very few people who have very high W-2 incomes and then are also doing short-term rentals. It's just a very, very small subsegment of the real estate investing population. At the end of the day, the rules are not clear. H&R Block, the reference, which I have in that episode, had pretty good information and one of the best resources I've seen. There are a lot of resources I've seen come out on different like kind of blog pages. A lot of people file on Schedule C. It is not uncommon at all. So, but it doesn't really necessarily matter what the majority of CPAs do. What matters is what you do, your CPA does, and what you're comfortable with and what he or she is comfortable with. Okay, but kind of going from that, house hacking a duplex is awesome. That is a great way to do a short-term rental, especially if you want to self-manage. It's an easy way to get hours in because, an easy way to manage because you don't have to be driving places. And if you want to get some active hours in self-managing, it's your own building. And we have a duplex. And one of the things is a lot of times when you're doing regular maintenance, you can have, like we have a property manager for the other side of our duplex. So when the property manager schedules some maintenance to be done on the other side, we just find out who they're sending over and we let them know, hey, come over to our side also. And then we just don't have to deal with organizing and contacting and all the stuff. It's a lot easier to just kind of get it all done at once. And it's kind of like BOGO, buy one, get one. Okay, so you can kind of leverage that management to both sides, and you're not necessarily doing a lot more work than you otherwise would have been doing anyhow, just managing your own household. Okay. But yeah, if you have a duplex that works as a long-term rental on the other side, then that is great. That is like my first good criteria. So this goes to the other question is, in the Facebook community, interested in your thoughts about what makes up a good short-term rental. What criteria would you use? So one of those main criteria I have are, does it make a good long-term rental? You don't want to depend on short-term rental ability because it is so significantly volatile. And local jurisdictions, even without an HOA, could put them to an end pretty quickly at any location. So, if you want to be real estate investing for a long time, you don't want to be doing things illegal, or not allowed by your community. So find something that's good long-term rental first. That way you're not holding on to something that doesn't make you money if you have to shut down a short-term rental. So you're buying a duplex here at a good price, it sounds like, and this is in San Francisco, so the prices are going to be pretty high, which I actually like for high-income people. This just doesn't make sense to me to be a landlord for like a $60,000 property like I have, which is my first property. And cash flow is great, but it's a few $100 a month. It's just not going to move the needle at all. If you're buying a duplex that, I don't know, easily this duplex probably costs $1 million, might cost $1.5 million or more. I don't know, but let's just say at least $1 million. It's in San Francisco, so each side $500,000, and then at least you have, you're getting a check of thousands of dollars per month. And the time you're spending has a better proportion to the value of the rent, and so your time might be worthwhile. Okay, so let's assume that this makes money as a long-term rental. If you do it as a short-term rental, then yeah, there will be more management and more work, but you should, I would think, be able to double your revenue per month. If that works out, then you should be able to get the rent from the short-term rental to cover the rent for both sides. Okay, it's hard for a long-term rental to get one unit to pay for both sides. Those margins are tough. With a fourplex, you certainly could get to those numbers. With three of them, and then cash flow from three could basically make up the rent for the fourth. So live in one and rent out the other three. You could get there. But on a duplex, that's pretty much impossible with a long-term rental unless you're getting it at a super good price, right? So as a short-term rental, though, and you double that revenue, you could triple the revenue, then by all means, you could cover both. And so then you're living for free. And the cost of living is usually the number one expense for Americans, with the exception of tax, right? So like 30% plus of our income goes to tax, probably around 34%, and that's in Texas. If we were in California, it'd be around probably 42%. Outside of tax, then housing is number two or number one. And so, yes, I'm seeing these comments. I am awake. I'm barely awake, Vina. Okay. So yeah, if you are paying that much tax, then housing is probably number two expense. But if you can get rid of number two expense, then your cost of living is super low. So when we were house hacking on the weekends, like our primary goal was, let's get enough rent, like $1,500 a weekend, times 4 weekends is $6,000. That would pay for our mortgage, principal, interest, and insurance on just that property. And so if we got like a 5-weekend month, or if there was, if we got a booking during the week, then that's gravy. Or if we booked like a whole month, that could pay for the house, and it could pay for like an apartment for the month. So we'd be living completely for free. But then you're basically living in a $1 million house, and you're not paying for it. So it was interesting because we were living in a nicer place, and it cost us less than we were when we were just renting a $2,000 a month apartment. Now, of course, this was like work, and like any job, we were making money doing this, right? But so it still was some work. But this sounds like a fantastic situation. You buy a duplex at a good price. It makes for a long-term rental. You can certainly try to do it as a short-term rental first, and that's probably the best way to do it. If you're just getting started, like what you could do is you could furnish one place like nicely with your own furnishings, and because those are like from your old place, then you can like go super cheap. Like I'm talking about like if you're really in a hustle here, you get your own place that you're going to live in and you live super cheap. Like when we lived in our first house and people came in here like, you have no furniture. Like we were just sitting in here for a year and then converting it to a rental. We got it for $0 down. So the cost of us living here was basically zero, because if we had put a down payment and then that cost more than our rent for a year, or our down than our mortgage for a year. So anyway, you could like live super cheap on one side, and you could put your old furnishings in the other side, furnish it, get it rented, get it ready to go, and start doing short-term ASAP. Put it on the books, and like let's say that you got it today, you could have it rented out for the next 3 months, and you could get 3 months on the books and put it on Schedule C for this year, take some massive depreciation, and continue into next year, see how it goes. You evaluate this for like a 12-month period, and then you're like, okay, I don't like this. Fine, you can take your furniture back, okay, into your own place. Or what I would do is I would say, okay, we're done with the short-term rental. I would just move into the other side that's already furnished. And then your other side where you were staying before, which you didn't really furnish because you were just like sleeping on yoga mats for a year, then you just convert that to a long-term rental and you're done. But then you also just took, boom, all this bonus depreciation. And you don't have to recapture it because you didn't sell it, okay? So you could just kind of do it that way if you wanted to test the waters. Or you could do long-term and then switch to short-term. But I think when you're initially moving over, that might be like the best opportunity to try to do this as a short-term rental and just see how it goes. So continuing on what make things good short-term rentals. So you want to have a good long-term rental. You want to have good margins like with any investment, because it is an investment, right? You should, if you're planning to do this, you should be thinking of this as an investment first, and the fact that you're going to live there be secondary. You don't want to be thinking of this as like, I'm going to buy a place and find a way to decrease my costs. That's not the optimal way to think of this as a real estate investment. Okay. There are properties that are houses that you might enjoy living in, and there's properties that you might make good investments, and there's a small amount of overlap. And those are the properties that you would want to target, okay, if you're trying to house hack. All right, what are the things? You want to have, one of the really nice things I liked in Eric Tate's talk was he talked about blue ocean. I didn't mention it yesterday, but it's the idea that you have like no competition, right? You don't want to be swimming with a bunch of other similar properties fighting for tenants when tenants are low. Now, in San Francisco, there's probably a bunch of people who are staying in Airbnbs, and often easy to get them filled up, but at what price? If we had a property, our property is basically a blue ocean over here. We're in a very nice part of town, and there are not many properties here that are on VRBO Airbnb. There are some, but ours is a relatively new build. It's only 5 years old. And so it's like nice and clean and new looking. So appearances and looking new are so much more important than things like square footage. Okay. Like people want to look appetized to go to the place. Like if you're going to a hotel, right? You get sold on just the way it looks, then the room is small, but it's what it looks like more than what it is. And so we have a very attractive place to certain people. When people have to have short-term rentals for, let's say, a month, and they're local here, they have an insurance claim, we're like the only game in town. And so we have a little bit of a monopoly on this. And if I could go back, I would have not booked out as many weekends, and I would have just kept my calendar empty for the people who want to book out for a month or 2 months or 3 months. Because once you book out those weekends, then you can't book out a 2-3 month rental. And those are huge. Okay. That's assuming you're getting like a house. Okay. Because, for example, our house is really big. People don't travel with big families through the week and the weekends, through the week and the weekends, like traveling. All right. They'll come on the weekends. Business travelers travel during the week. So you have to think about who your avatar is. Who is your target? Where are you going to maximize your revenue for your property? If you have a 3-bedroom property versus a 1-bedroom, you're going to have different clientele, right? One person is not going to rent out a 3-bedroom. Are you trying just to get in and out business travelers? Business travelers are fantastic guests. They cause no problems. They check in at night. They check out in the morning. They just want to have Wi-Fi and air conditioning and a bed, right? They're very easy customers. When you only have one person in there, it's almost never damaged. Almost never. I've seen some bad stories, but you're in San Francisco and the rates are still going to be not super, super cheap. And so you're not I've seen people rent out rooms or 1-bedrooms for $20 for a night, $30 for a night. You don't want to be renting a place that cheap, right? It attracts people that you don't want in your place. But you have to think, do you want to have business travelers or do you want to have tourists or do you want families? And you need to look at what the competition is. So AirDNA. So look, if you haven't seen David Draginas' talk from PIMDCon, you should check it out. AirDNA is great for looking at comparable properties. And you can use that to assess, what margins different properties make in different areas. There's different tools out there. I know somebody here had a property in Arlington, which is near Six Flags and near the football stadium. Six Flags is open all year round. And if you had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot place over there, you can keep that place booked up most of the year. You have baseball games across the street, when there was baseball, or there is right now, but that's 6 months of the year. And then you also have Six Flags, and then you also have the Cowboys games, and you can do really well. And the property values aren't super low, but travelers will pay a lot of money because they're traveling and they need a place nearby. Parking alone for a Cowboys game can be $50, and you're still walking half a mile. It's insane. So you can make incredibly good margins there. However, there are a lot of things that vary. Once people start doing that, other people can start doing that. And then you have competition, right? So you have to be able to, again, have other options. But you have to just look at the market, and you have to choose what your avatar is and who you really want to rent to. You might find it easier to book out 1 week at a time instead of having daily in and outs and having people check in on Friday to Friday. You can do that and try to find a balance that works for you. Remember, if you're trying to get onto Schedule C, though, one of the helpful criteria to meet is a median stay of 7 days or less. So what you can do is you can book up a handful of short stays and then do some longer stays to try to keep your average number down. Okay, if you're targeting families, things like a pool, especially these days during COVID, if you're in an area that the weather supports having a pool, pools are gigantically favorable. If we could rent out a house just for COVID for a week with a pool in the middle of the summer, we would have done it. We considered it. But a lot of people were booking up those houses, and they were actually going for a premium because everybody wanted to do a staycation with a pool. I think about the things that you want when you travel. Having amenities in the house, if you're a family traveling, are huge. So pool, hot tub, a pool table, shuffleboard, things like that. People love those things when they're traveling with family. That way the family can just stay in the house and have activities to do. Having a campfire if you're, out in the woods more, things like that. If you do have a pool, and I don't have one, so I haven't actually learned about this well, but you definitely want to have insurance, however, right? That is something that does scare a lot of people with short-term rentals, but it is something that can make your short-term rental much more favorable. But there are insurance policies that specialize just for short-term rentals, and you can probably get riders for pools and whatnot. Having beds is much more important than having square footage. So we have a huge house, but if we had just listed it as having 4 beds, it would not have been competitive for weekend stays. For family stays, it wasn't as big of a deal because most families don't travel with a bunch of family, especially if they're for a long time, but sometimes they still did. We slept 14 comfortably, and that allowed us to get to like $700, $800 a night on the weekends. If we only had one bed per bedroom, we wouldn't have been there, and we would not have been able to compete with the other short-term rentals that have like a 2,000 square foot place with 4 bedrooms versus our like 3,700 square foot place with 4 bedrooms. Okay, I think I covered all of it. Oh, definite things that are bad for short-term rentals. HOAs, okay? You do not want to have an HOA. Even if it's like, some HOAs are more powerful than others, but if there's an HOA, there's an HOA. And any short-term rental with an HOA, that's just likely not going to fly. They're gonna crush you. Gated communities usually have an HOA, but even if there's not formally an HOA, although there probably has to be some sort of, when any gated community, I wouldn't do. There was actually, who is the guy? The old quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I can see his face. He dated Jessica Simpson. Tony Romo. He lived in a very reasonable house not far from my work for many years. And it went up for sale for about $1 million in 2015. And I was shocked that he was living in that house, because he could have obviously lived in a much, much nicer house. But that was like the house he bought when he was like a rookie, and he stayed there for a long time. A very reasonable house. But I was like, this would have been an amazing Airbnb house, because it was like Tony Romo's house, and Cowboys fans are crazy. They drive like 8 hours to sit in a trailer and watch the football game from the parking lot outside of the stadium without actually going to the game. And then they pay like a lot of money to park their trailer on the parking lot. That's a totally random aside, but I was like, this could be an incredible Airbnb to sell Tony Romo's house for a weekend. But it's in the gated community. There was no way that was going to fly, having different guests coming in there, checking in every weekend. People would catch on, and that would get crushed. So HOAs, things like that. Having, lots of competition. Okay, so a lot of people, they look at getting like a condo in, let's say, Mexico. And they're like, well, we can buy it and we can stay there a few weeks a year, and then we'll just have the management company rent it out when we're not there. Okay, in theory, that could be great. And we went to one of these a couple of years when we were in Mexico, and went on a tour just to check it out, because we stayed at like a resort, but they had condos, and it wasn't like a timeshare presentation. But they had some for sale. I was like, okay, let's just check it out. Let's make this a business expense, right? Let's look at some real estate. So we go there, and I'm like, okay, you have these for rent, and you have these for sale, and these that you're renting out, some of them are being rented out by individual owners, but then others are being rented out by the actual resort company because they haven't sold them. And I'm like, which ones are they going to rent out? They're going to rent out their own units. They're not going to rent out the other people's units first. That makes no sense to them. They're only going to collect like the 30% management fee, whereas when they rent out their own, they're going to collect the entire rent. So that's just a disaster waiting to happen. So when you're in a community where there's a bunch of other units, it's often a race to the bottom, to price-wise, to get those booked, right? You want to have some sort of competitive advantage. So I really don't like those, like you have like where there's a whole bunch of other vacation rentals right there, because often the margins can be good. And so when people have vacancies, there's always somebody who's willing to cut their price more. And you don't want to be in that situation where you're trying to cut prices just to keep it occupied. Now, with short-term rentals, you don't need to keep it occupied all the time either. Like I know somebody who had a condo in Dallas, $100 a day, had it occupied 29 days a month. You can totally do that at that price point. But you don't necessarily have to be that occupied with short-term rentals. You could be like 70% occupied and get really good prices. And, if you fill it up completely, then you kind of lose your ability to crank the prices up higher. Like if I was actively just doing it right now, and if our other side was empty and we were trying to run that as a short-term rental, I would keep our prices at $900 a day. I'm surprised at how many inquiries we get. I mean, we could probably keep it 50% occupied at $900 a day. Just because every time somebody wants it for like a month, they stretch it out to 2 months, or 2 months stretches to 3 months. And you only need like a couple of bookings a year, and you end up doing okay, right? You could have like 3 bookings at 3 months of the year and make a ton with very little stress, right? Because they would be there for a long time. And just basically know where your best margins are and just go after that market specifically. And if we do that, then you just really maximize your margins, and you can actually decrease your work as well. Okay. So what else do we have in here? Yeah, where's Tony Romo now? I think he is in Frisco. I think he may have gone up closer to where the new training facility is, but he doesn't play football anymore. So, but yeah, he moved up, I think, toward Frisco. Anybody else? Okay. I think that's it. I was meaning for this to be a short one, but this was a long one. And tomorrow's going to be episode 100. It's going to be October 13th already. I'm excited to vote tomorrow. I'm supposed to get up at like 6 o'clock in like 5.5 hours and try to get there and be the first person in line to vote and get out before anybody else gets there. We will see how this works. All right. Here we go. Yes, house hacking a duplex. Okay, that is it for tonight. We added like 150 people to the Facebook group or something in just the past 2 days. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, PAMDCon. That is awesome. And yeah, we are growing quickly, and please put your posts in there, and I will try to get to all of them. I'll just do sessions and just go through a whole bunch of them one at a time, and we'll get through it all. It's always a pleasure helping you all out and talking online. Until tomorrow for episode number 100. What are we going to talk about? All right. Good night.